Halloween night, 1974. A 17 years old girl walks out of a party in a Utah to buy a pack of cigarettes and simply vanishes. Her body is found a month later in a canyon, bound, beaten, and left knocked out of the side of the highway. For a 51 years, her family is told, we think it was a Ted Bundy, but we can't prove it. Now that DNA technology has blown that cold case wide open, forcing investigators to stand in front of cameras and say, we can finally confirm Ted Bundy did it. Ted Bundy did it tonight. you know, but it is really solid. And are we actually safer now? Stay with me. Ted Bundy is supposed to be an old history, a monster from 1970s, executed in Florida's electric chair back in 1989. But somehow, decades after his death, his name keeps showing up at press conference, on police reports, and in brand new headlines. Just days ago, Utah authorities announced that new DNA testing has definitively linked Bundy to the 1974 murder of a 17 years old Laura Ann Aime, an unsolved case that's been cold for 15 years. Investigators long suspected Bundy, and he even verbally admitted to killing Laura before his execution. But they never had enough evidence to close the file until now. In this video, we are going to unpack who Laura Ann Aime was and what happened to Halloween night, and how this case stayed open for half a century, even after Bundy confessed. The exact DNA breakthrough that finally forced investigators to say case closed. And the big debate in this topic is opened up about old evidence, new science, and whether we can ever really know how many people Ted Bundy killed. Some critics argue that this proves once again the system failed for decades and is just now catching up, using Bundy's name to claim a win. Supporters say it shows exactly the opposite. The careful evidence preservation and modern DNA tools can finally give families the truth they were denied for a half century. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell you about another 51 years old case where Bundy was suspected, but new DNA actually cleared him and pointed to someone else. That twisted changes how a lot of people this latest announcement. Do you think it even matters to solve a murder 50 years later if the killer is already dead, or is that still real justice? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Ted Bundy in 1 minute. Before we dive into the Laura's case, we need to quick snapshot of what Ted Bundy was. Ted Bundy was one of the most infamous serial killers in US history, linked to at least 30 murdered women and girls across several states during the 1970s, Washington, Utah, Colorado, Florida, and more. He was known for approaching victims in public places, parks, college campuses, sorority houses, often pretended to be injured, then abducting, raping, and killing them. At the time of some of his Utah crimes, he was studying law at the University of Utah, presenting himself as charming and educated while secretly hunting for victims. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to death in Florida for multiple murders, including the infamous attacks at Florida State University and the killing of 12 years old Kimberly Leach, and was executed in 1989. Even as he was facing the execution, investigators knew the official count, around 30 victims, was almost certainly not the full story. Do you believe the 30 victims number, or do you think Ted Bundy killed far more people than we all ever know? What's your guess? We are about to walk step by step through the night Laura disappeared and how her body was found. But what really matters is what investigators did and didn't do in 1974, and why that matters for the DNA match 51 years later. It's October 31st, 1974, Halloween night in Utah country. 17 years old Laura Ann Aime goes to a party in Utah country with friends. At some point, late night, she leaves the gathering alone, reportedly telling others she is going to buy cigarettes from a nearby convenience store. She never makes it back. About a month later, hikers discovered her body on the embankment near a highway in American Fork Canyon, just outside Salt Lake City. Laura is found bound, beaten, and without clothing. Evidence suggests she was sexually assaulted, and investigators believe she may have been kept alive for some time after being abducted. The scene is horrifying. Detectives collect what evidence they can, biologically samples, clothing fibers, and whatever might help in a future trial. But this is the 1970s. DNA testing, as we know, it does not exist yet. At first, there is no obvious suspect. It's just one more brutal killing of a teenage girl. In decade when multiple young women are going misses across the West. If you were Laura's family in 1974, hearing almost nothing, no arrests, no trial, what would you have believed happened to her? A random predator, someone she knew. Let me know your theory. Now, there were Bundy enters the picture. After the murder, after the body is found, and what he says on death row will haunt this family and this case file for decades. Bundy gets arrested and suspicion grows. Fast forward to August 1975, Utah police pull over a suspicious Volkswagen Beetle and find in the car rope, handcuffs, and ski mask and other items that look a lot more like kidnap kit than normal luggage. The driver is Ted Bundy. Over the next few years, Bundy convicted of kidnapping and assault in Utah, then tried a multiple murders across several states, and eventually sentenced to death in Florida. As a detectives look back to old unsolved files, Laura Ann Ames murder starts at standout. The time period overlaps with Bundy's presence in Utah. The victim profile, young, attractive teen girl, matches many of his known victims. The location, America Fork Canyon, is within driving distance of where he was living and hunting. Investigators became increasingly convicted that Bundy killed Laura, but there is a problem. They cannot prove it in court. Before his execution in 1989, Bundy sits down with investigators and starts talking. He verbally admits to killing Laura, but he gives almost no details, nothing that would stand up as solid, corroborated evidence in a courtroom. Some critics argue that Bundy was multiplying investigators confessing selectively to boost his own mythology or buy more time without letting anyone truly verifying his claims. Others strongly disagree, saying that even with limited details, a confession from Bundy in a case that similar should have been enough to officially close it. The Utah County Sheriff's Office make a controversial decision. They refuse to take his verbal confession as a final proof. They leave the case officially open, saying they need something more solid than a killer's word. Do you agree? What with call should a serial killer's confession ever been enough to close a case, or do you think they did the right thing by waiting for real evidence? Tell me what you think. Decades ago, Bundy is executed. The evidence boxes gathers dust. Then around 2023, one upgrade in a state crime lab quietly changes everything. The science finally catches up. For years, Laura's case sits in shortage, literally in boxes, while technology slowly advances. Then in 2023, Utah State Crime Lab gets new DNA technology capable of pulling usable genetic profiles from a samples that are tiny, degraded, mixed, or decades old. Investigators go back to Laura's file and carefully re-examine the physical evidence collected in 1974, focusing on biological material that might still contain a usable DNA signal. They managed to extract a single male DNA profile from evidence tied to Laura's body. That profile is then uploaded to a national enforcement database where now offenders' DNA is stored, including the sample taken from a Ted Bundy in Florida. The results is a match. A male DNA on Laura's evidence matches Ted Bundy's profile, according to Utah authorities. At a press conference, Utah County Sheriff Mike Smith announces that they can now say without a doubt and with certainty The Ted Bundy murdered Laura Ann Aime in the fall of 1974, and that the case is now officially closed. Supporters say this is exactly how the system is supposed to work. Evidence preserved for decades, technology improving over time. A cold case finally solved with hard science, not just suspicion. Some critics argue that when you already believe Bundy did it, any match can be seen as confirmation, and they worry about overconfidence in old, degraded samples, even though the lab insists the results meet current standards. When you have when you hear DNA match, do you think 100% solved, or do you still keep a little doubt in your mind, especially on 50 years old evidence? Do you agree that this is enough? Let me know. The family reaction is, and at the same news conference, Laura's sister, Michael Impala, speaks publicly about her sister and the years of not knowing. She calls Laura the twin quintessential daughter of Utah country, and talks about how people still care about her case even 51 years later. Authorities and family members described the announcement of a form of closure, while also acknowledgement that no decision from a lab can remove the grief or bring Laura back. Some supporters say this is a proof that cold case work is worth even every penny, that families do get something real from final hearing. We know who did this. Others strongly disagree, arguing that what families really lost was a fair, timely investigations back in 1970s, and that closure is a word police use more than victims' relatives actually feel. If you were in Laura's family, would this announcement bring you a peace, or would it just reopen old wounds? What do you think really happened emotionally at that moment? Comments your thoughts. So that's one cold case tied to Bundy. But just to complicate things, there is another 51 years old case where people thought Bundy was the killer until DNA proved someone else did it. The twist changes how some people see this Utah announcement. Another 51 years old mystery when DNA cleared Bundy. In a separate case from 1973, a half naked body of 46 years old Anne Woodward was found murdered inside a pub she showed. She warned with her husband in Moab, Utah, strangled with her own pants, her body between pool tables. Because Bundy was known to have raped and killed multiple women in the region around that time. Many believed he might have been responsible, and some assumed she was one of his unnamed victims. However, there were also other suspects. One man, Douglas Keith Chowdomilka, was seen near the victim's car that night and was interviewed by police, but he denied being at the bar, and his girlfriend gave him an alibi before later briefly excusing him and then reacting it. Decades later, just like in Laura's case, investigators reopened the file and used preserved DNA evidence with modern testing. That testing reportedly point away from the Bundy and towards another suspect, effectively solving the case and showing that initial fears about Bundy being responsible were likely wrong. Some critics argue that it is a perfect reminder. Just because Bundy was active in an area doesn't mean he committed every unsolved murder, and that's why DNA matters both ways, to confirm and to clear. Supporters at the Utah Country announcement say this comparison actually strengthens the new Laura Ames result. In one old case, DNA took Bundy off the board. In this one, it locks him firmly in. Does does seeing a case where DNA cleared Bundy make you more confident in the science when it implicates him, or do you still feel cautious? Do you agree that it cuts both ways? This is one of the loop. Up next, we will look at the opposing perspectives around this new Bundy confirmations. In this, a huge win for justice or late attempt to fix decades of failures. This proves the system worked. On one side, you have law enforcement officials and many true crime followers who see this as a success story. They point out that Investigators in 1974 carefully preserved evidence even before anyone imagined modern DNA testings. The Utah Crime Lab invested in new technology in 2023, especially to revisit different cold cases. The DNA profile of Laura's case was strong enough to produce a clear match to Bundy's known sample from Florida. Supporters say this sends a powerful message to other families. We haven't forgotten. Even 15 years later, evidence can still speak, and predators, dead or alive, can still be officially named and counted. Some also argue that where every confirmed Bundy victims helps clarify his full pattern, gives us more honest historical record, and might help solve other cases by showing where he really was and what he really did. This proves the system failed for decades. On the other side, some critics, civil liberties voices see this less a victory and more as late repair job on a system that failed Laura in real time. They point out that Laura was killed in 1974 and Bundy was arrested and connected to the murders in the mid 1970s. Yet her case sat unresolved for a half a century. Bundy verbally acknowledged killing her before his execution in 1989, but that confession wasn't enough to close the case, leaving the family in limbo. Only when new technology became available in 2023 did anyone seriously revisit the evidence with fresh tools. Some critics argue this shows how resource department justice can be. If a country doesn't invest in lab upgrades or cold case reviews, cases like Laura simply never get that second look. Others strongly disagree, says hindsight in is easy, and that you can't blame 1970s investigators not for not using technology that didn't exist yet. When you look at this, do you feel more gratitude that the truth finally came out, or more anger that it took 51 years? Which emotion is stronger for you? Comment below. Emotion is the center of this story. A sister community, a killer who been dead for decades still hunting people. Next, we are going to zoom in one on that emotional turning point and then ask whether solving this case actually makes anyone safer today. For Laura's family, this isn't just a news headline, it's a life sentence of grief. Imagine being 17 when your sister disappears on a Halloween night, then hearing a month later that hikers found her body in a canyon, bound, beaten, stripped her clothes for 51 years. Every anniversary, every Halloween, every news special about Ted Bundy is a reminder of that loss. Then finally in 2026, you sit in a room watching the sheriff says publicly, we can now say without a doubt that Ted Bundy murdered Laura Ann Aime, and this case is officially closed. Some relatives describe this as a kind of relief, not happiness, but a heavy door quietly closing after decades of being stuck open. Others in similar cases have said that each new revelation can actually reopen old trauma, forcing them to visualize the crime again, relieve the loss, and confront a monster they thought they were done hearing about. At the same time, Bundy's confirmed victim count continues to rise, even from beyond the grave. Authorities in Utah and everywhere else has linked him to other unsolved cases using new analysis of decades old evidence, and say the profile from Laura's case can now be used to check against other open files. So emotionally, this is double-edged movement. One family finally hears certainly. The families might be about to find other their worst suspicious or true. If a serial killer keeps being tied to new victims decades after his death, does that helps us heal, or does it just keep the fear and fascination alive? What do you feel when you hear Bundy claimed another victim today? Maybe it's possible. Which brings us to the big, uncomfortable question. Does solving a 51 years Bundy cold case in 2026 actually make anyone safer now? Or is the really about something else? Here's what we know. Based on public statements and reporting, new DNA testings in Utah has conclusively linked to Ted Bundy to the murder of 17 years old Laura Ann Aime, and authorities says the case is now closed. Bundy has long been suspected and even verbally acknowledged killer her before the execution. But investigators held the file open until they had hard physical proof. The same kind of technology is now being used on the other cold cases, some confirming Bundy, some excluding him, and some pointing to completely different suspects. Some critics argue kind of announcement is really about reputation. Police department wanting to show progress, close old cases, and attach a famous name to a difficult unsolved crime. Supporters say that's a cynical and that regardless of motives, the forensic evidence is what it is. A match is a match, and closed case is better than a open wound. But underneath, the headline was too bigger. Unanswered questions. How many more Bundy victims are still out there, buried in cold case files, with families who never got answers? Investigators now say the DNA profile from Laura's case can help other agencies test their own evidence, hinting that more long unsolved murders could soon be tied to Bundy. Does solving 51 years case change how safe we are today? Some people believe these breakthroughs prove we are finally building a world where killers can't hide forever, where evidence outlives them and truth eventually catches up. Others argue that while it matters for history and for families, it doesn't stop the next Bundy. It is just a cleanup of the paperwork on the last one. Would you think it is the real purpose of solving cold case like this, or is it mainly for the families, or for the record, for law enforcement credibility, or for publicly safety? Is there more to the story than what we are being told? Let me know in the comments. We have walked through the night of crime, the decades of doubt, the DNA breakthrough, and both sides of the debate. Now I want to hand this case over to you with one final question. What I want to know, answer publicly right here. You are just heard a full arc of 51 years mystery. A teenager vanishes on Hollywood night in 1974. Her body is found in canyon, bound and brutalized. A serial killer becomes the main suspect, then admits guilt without enough detail. Evidence sits in boxes for decades while technology evolves. And finally, in 2026, a DNA match forces investigators says yes, this was Ted Bundy. Some critics argue this is the justice system finally doing right by Laura, protecting the integrity of evidence, refusing to close a case on a confession alone, and using science to get it right. Supporters of that view see it is a good case, handled carefully enough that we can trust the answer, and say it shows we are safer now because future monsters will they can't hide forever. Others strongly disagree. They say this was never a good case. That is took half a century to officially name someone others already knew was the likely killer. The Loras wasn't protected when it matters, and that closing a file in 2026 doesn't make the streets of 2026 any safer. So here's where I turn it over to you. Do you think this was ultimately a good case, handled as well as possible given the era and the technology, or story of 50 years of failure patching up at the last minute? Does this new Bundy DNA match actually make you feel that modern society is safer from predators like him, or does it just reminds you that there might be another Bundys out there we haven't catched yet? Do you agree with the way investigators handles Laura case from the 1970s to now? What do you think really happened that night in Utah country? And is there more to the story, about evidence, about Bundy, about other possible victims that we still haven't been told? Let me know in the comments. If you want more deep dive breakthroughs like this, where we go step by step through the facts, the timeline, the science, and the opposing viewpoints, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case we expose. I will leave you with one final question to debate now, that this 51 years old case is officially solved and tied to Ted Bundy. Do you feel that real justice has finally been served and a community is safer, or is this just one more reminder that some monster keep hunting people even long after they are gone? Tell me your answer below. I will be reading every comment. Thank you for watching my video.